Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on whether you're joining us from YouTube, LinkedIn Live, or Facebook, or 210 Cups and a String. No matter where you're joining us from, hello. My name is Jason Buffington. With me this week is not Dave Russell.
I'm
We've had
definitely
an
not Dave
upgrade
Russell.
for the month of September. Melissa Palmer. Melissa, I am so glad to have you. You are joining us all month.
I am. Thank you so much for extending the invite, Jason. I'm really looking forward to it.
So this is the first in a three-part series, and I am super excited about this. We're going to be talking about disaster recovery, business continuity. We hear a lot of hype about ransomware and cybersecurity. Certainly, one of the things I think a lot of folks don't realize is that ransomware and cyber attacks are just
Disasters.
disasters, right? So we're going to talk about that holistically. Also, September is a good time to be thinking about this because when you're planning the what are you going to do better in 2022, disaster recovery planning is something that you ought to be doing better. Can we get an amen? Just,
Amen. Absolutely.
Awesome. So please, so I am coming from the great state of Texas. Melissa is chimed in from New Jersey. Our producer is in Georgia. Over in the old country, we have Romania is also represented as well. So please pile on in the comments. Tell us where you're from. We'd love to turn the entire global map green during the webcast and each and every other day while we're at it. But let's go ahead and get started. So we're talking about disaster recovery, and Melissa, I think you've probably forgotten more about DR planning than I ever learned. So super excited to have you on for the series. Let's talk first and foremost. We brought in an expert here. Customers ought to be bringing in experts too, right? There's different kinds of personas that are involved when we really think about DR differently than backup. We put up a couple graphics here. How about you take a swing at it, and then I'll come back and let's talk about what kind of people should be involved in
Yeah. And
disaster recovery.
really, the short answer is everybody should be involved in disaster recovery, right? I have a very heavy VMware background, but from a VMware perspective, if I was creating a DR plan, I'd also need to talk to my backup admin, my network team, my storage team, and most importantly, the ops who's probably going to be carrying out this plan when it happens, and the application and workload owners, right? Because if I don't have a good understanding of, hey, how critical is this application? What kind of recovery point objective do I need to hit? What kind of recovery time objective do I need to hit? I can't really design a solution that will allow us to recover these applications. So it's one of those things everybody really needs to be involved in. Everybody needs to be talking to each other, which I have seen be a little bit difficult in some organizations, quite honestly.
So basically what you're saying is DR can really bring people together, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, you brought up a couple of really interesting ideas. You talked about determining what an SLA would look like. And I really like the graphic that the Veeam creative folks put together on the left-hand side. Even if you're just looking at an application, a workload to think about, I think it's interesting that there's not one person who can say, okay, and this is how we're going to recover it, and this is what we're going to do. You got the backup person in the upper left-hand corner, right? They're the one who knows how to use the tools. All right. In the upper right-hand corner, you've got the workload owner. So that could be a DBA, that could be an email administrator, somebody who's responsible for the platform to be protected and recovered. And then on the bottom of that diagram on the left, you've got IT operations, who are probably the first people who are going to get the call when something
Yeah,
breaks.
they're going to get that call that nothing's working, unfortunately.
But my guess is if you don't have all three of those views represented, then you really are not wholly equipped simply just to recover that platform. And platform by platform, that triad's going to change, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to change, but it's going to stay the same too. Look, I always need to be talking to my backup admin, right, as the workload owner to make sure, hey, I need to make sure that my data is no older than 8 hours, right? I can't lose more than 8 hours worth of data. I have an 8-hour RPO. Are you, as the backup administrator, protecting that data appropriately, right? Do I have the right jobs in place? Am I using the right kind of jobs? Am I using the right infrastructure to make sure that I'm never going to lose more than 8 hours of data? So everybody really needs to be talking to each other pretty much all the time.
I love that. Now let's look at the right-hand side. So all three of that little triad from the left diagram is actually, they're all on the right hemisphere of that right diagram, right? That's all the IT folks.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa, you said something really interesting. You said if my application has an 8-hour RTO, meaning how quick can I get it back up and running again? And honestly, my guess is it's the people on that left hemisphere. It's the business owner who really ought to be helping us decide
Yeah,
how fast does that app need to come back?
absolutely. And that's probably one of the hardest parts of business continuity and disaster recovery is sitting down, looking at all our applications and decide those things. How fast do I need to recover and how much data is acceptable to lose? And honestly, that's usually tied back to dollars and cents, right? It's either in some way, shape, or form that application makes us a lot of money or it's going to impact us financially if we can't use it. And that's usually what gets these RPO and RTO values assigned, but everybody's going to have a really good understanding of A, all the applications in the environment, and B, what are they used for? How are they used for? Who's logging into them? What kind of downtime can we handle? I was actually talking about BCDR earlier this morning because I talk about that a lot. And we were talking about, the digital era where I have a lot of organizations where everybody's working from home now. And maybe that system that they're all logging into to work from home is now the most critical application because they can't sell anything. We can't do any business if our people can't get into our environment to work, right? And that's a little bit of a shift from before when everybody was going to a brick and mortar office all the time and everybody was already there to work with the data.
That totally makes sense to me. One of the last times I did a BCDR consult, I went through an exercise with some of the leadership team, and I said, okay, so let's mock up what this would look like. And I listed like 5 or 6 applications, and one of them was the shipping room application. For putting out packages. And I asked the folks that were in my workshop, hey, stack rank these. So there was a CRM application, there was email, there was unstructured file data, there was the backend database platform, and then there's mailroom. And everybody, they couldn't agree on most of them. They couldn't agree on what was the top. But everybody agreed that the mailroom, the shipping application, was the lowest application. And then I mentioned, oh, by the way, I should mention the client that we're doing this mock exercise for is Amazon. So all of a sudden, shipping room seems to be more important than one might have assumed.
Yeah, that context is really important.
Yes, it is. And IT folks, no offense, because that's most of the people who are listening today, IT folks don't always have that same translation of what does the application downtime actually cost the business. Melissa, you mentioned that with all of our remote workers that times are changing. Let's look at where the remote workers are coming from today.
All right.
Let's take a look at the map. Let's see hey, Canadians in the house.
That's a lot of green.
I love it when the Canadians are in the house because all of a sudden the new hemisphere just turns green right away. So that's awesome. Also noticing some Washington in the house, Florida, almost the 2 most extreme states in the U.S. Colombia. Some good times over there. Let's look over in the, okay, we've got Spain, the Boots. Italy is in the house. Taking a look over, we've got Nigeria, Iran, and you can always count on folks from India joining. I think they are probably some of our most frequent and consistent listeners. So thank you for joining us this morning. And then I should probably give a shout out to, there's probably somebody in the state of Ohio that's chiming in somewhere because we got lots of Veeamers in Ohio and someone wants to keep us honest. All right. So yeah, please keep piling on. Tell us where you're from along the way. Yeah. So understanding, and that's kind of the first part of the problem, right, is understanding what does downtime cost the business, right, and translating that back from the business stakeholders back to IT and not the other way around. You mentioned one of the things that I know you spend a lot of time with because you talk to IT pros is what is the skills necessary to be successful in DR, because backup admins alone don't typically have those skills.
Yeah, there really is a lot of skills that really are important. So, right, if we're just talking up basic DR, right, we need to know how to back up our data. Mm-hmm. More importantly, software and hardware, we need to know how to design our applications and how to design our IT infrastructure so that hopefully we don't have a disaster if we lose a rack, right? Hopefully we're designed and architected within our data center to withstand different levels of failure. So maybe we don't need to have a DR exercise if we lose a storage array because we've designed it the right way. You never know. And then applications. We have to have a good understanding of the applications in our environment and the ways that they work. And then, of course, all those other little things like operating systems, hypervisors, infrastructure, kind of that core, right? We really need to know these things. And probably how to back up and recover stuff is like a must know.
And I like the fact that everything that you talked about so far is really around designing resiliency into the present mode of operation, right? Because, if, for example, if I had 8 tires on my car instead of 4, right, 2 on each point, then I wouldn't worry about a flat tire because I just keep going. I guess that's why we all have dualies in Texas. But so there's a certain amount of designing resiliency into the architecture. And that's something that you have a lot of depth expertise in. And then there's, okay, how do I recover those tools? And that's all about IT recovery. But let's turn that over, right? Because that's what a technologist needs to know to recover an app. BCDR is a different set of acumen. It may have come from a backup person, right? I mean, the backup person might be in there, so you could know that data. But let's talk about what BCDR folks really need to provide as guidance to their organizations.
Yeah, and they should have a basic understanding of how things work in an IT infrastructure. I think that just helps everybody. But there's really less techie stuff they need to understand. They need to understand all of the operational processes and economics for the business, right? How does our business run? What do we actually do? What are the things that we must continue doing? They need to understand the business to IT dependencies. How does that translate into our systems that we're protecting? And then depending on what type of customer it might be kind of different compliance regulations for the industry, for where they are, data sovereignty. It really kind of depends on the industry, location, all that kind of good stuff. So it's a lot of like the almost softer skills that I know a lot of us techies tend to just overlook because we're so focused on speeds and feeds and RTOs and RPOs. But that's all tied back to a wider business continuity plan.
Right. Maybe the way for folks to think about this is everything that's in the green, everything that the technologists do, that is the what and the how. But what's really important is when your organization is thinking about real BCDR planning, it has to start with the why. Right. And that's those orange boxes on that right hand side. Why is it this application has an RTO of 2 hours instead of 8? Why is it that that the business process would suffer if the IT systems go down? Why is it that these healthcare applications have a different standard than the rest of the environment? So that those whys are just so important. And admittedly, I think this is a great growth opportunity. If you are a data protection specialist, if you're a backup person, then transitioning from the tool sets on the how to being one of those guides to figure out the why, I think there's a great career path transition there if you can get the right training for it.
Yeah, and it absolutely ties back to what we started with. It's more than just the IT people in a room deciding all this stuff, right? Because as the backup admin or the VMware admin, I might not understand all of the business, and operational process. I just know my job is to keep VMware running. If anybody has any performance issues, I got to figure them out. And I just want that vSphere environment to always be available, right? Starting with why can be kind of difficult, and a lot of customers haven't necessarily done that. They might not even have decided what their RPOs and the RTOs for the applications are, right? And it's really hard to make sure that you're protecting your data the right way if you don't even know how fast you need to be able to recover it.
Yeah, and in fact, for the folks at home, if you're thinking about homework coming off of this particular session, that's a great conversation opener, right? If you are a workload owner and you happen to know who is the VP or the GM or the director of the users of your application, right? The beneficiary of your hard work, right? Take them to lunch, buy them a coffee, get on a Zoom call, something, and say, hey, look, I could fill your application over in 1 hour or 8. Convince me. Right? That's a great conversation to have, is how fast do you really need to get back up and why? Because otherwise what will happen is you go to any business leader, they say, it has to go as fast as possible. I'm the most important
application of the company. I'm the most important right here, me.
Most important.
I heard that a lot early in my career in the early days of virtualization. Everybody had the most important application and everybody needed me to give them a ton of CPU and memory in their VMs because they were number one. And I was like, I'm not sure about that. I'm just not sure.
Oh, I went the other way. I would say, absolutely. You are the most important application. Here's the bill for
Yes,
what
yes.
that's going to take the way that you asked for it. I'm going to need to cost charge you for that. What's your cost center number? And they're like, well, I mean, and you get this really awkward conversation. And you say, okay, now let's start to balance. What are you going to pay for versus what you think you need? So it's I was ornery as a youth. So, but it got some good conversations going. All right. So, hey, let's, I want to cover one last thought on this, and then we're going to hit the map really quick back again. So if you haven't yet piled on with where you're from. So we've talked a lot about these differences in skill sets, and I think a lot of organizations really are kind of starting to figure out where this fits. If we go to the next slide, this is actually some independent research that was done around who is predominant, who is part of the what do you call it? The BCDR planning council process team. And also, by the way, who's sitting at the top? Who's sitting at that end desk? Who's deciding this along the way? And I think you find two really interesting stories. If you're looking at the brighter greens, actually the way to really look at it, look where the backup admin sits, right? They're kind of the middle of the road on both lines. They're not the ones driving this conversation. It's either IT ops, or it's that IT leader, that VP of IT, that CIO. They're the ones driving the process. IT operations is like 3 times as likely to be at the table and 4 times as likely to be running the meeting than the backup admins. This just kind of reinforces that. Melissa, are you surprised by how this data lays out?
Not really, honestly. It's kind of showing some of our tying back to the business, having the CIO there, right? CIO is very chief information officer. He's very in tune with he or she is very in tune with the business requirements, whereas maybe the backup admins aren't as much. But you know what? At the end of the day, everybody needs a seat at the table, and the backup admins need to be definitely kept in the loop because they're the ones who are going to be able to tell you, hey, here's how we can achieve those RPOs and RTOs, and here's how much it's going to cost you.
That's right. That's right. All right. So I promised we hit the map. So let's go ahead and do that. So we've got a wide range of personas on the slide. Let's look at a wide range of folks on the call. So let's go back to North America really quick. We got Kansas in the house. I spent some time there over the summer. New York. A lot of us are thinking about y'all this month on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So thank you for joining us. Let's see, over in Europe, what do we got? We got Netherlands, we got Germany, Bulgaria's in the house. Don't see them quite as often. Thank you for joining. How about go over to LATAM? You can always count on my friends over there for joining. So we got Jamaica, we got Brazil, some good time down there. Mexico, is that Uruguay? Maybe. South Africa, Angola over in the African Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, and looks like Egypt came in from Facebook. So yeah, whichever the 3 mediums you are watching us on, please continue to pile on for that. Let's see. Oh, and you know what? So we also got some comments on here as well. Don't just tell us where you're from. Tell us what you're thinking about. And we'll try to answer your questions. Melissa, VJ commented on, it's good to bridge the technical with the business impact. I love that, right? So, because all of us technical people, we want to talk about RTO and RPO, and
Right.
yet you got to pay for it with dollars and euros.
We got to get our money someplace. Like I can give you some really, really fast RPOs and RTOs, but it's going to cost you.
That's right. But I think the other way around is flip that around and tell me, how much does it cost you when you're down, right? If we can spend 10%, 20% of your estimated downtime cost to mitigate that downtime, right? Then you just saved 90% of that budget.
That's
and
a really
in fact,
good way to look at it. You're going to save money by doing DRA.
You are, right? Look, here's the way I think about it. Servers break. Stuff happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is reality. It's kind of like your plumbing is going to have leaks, right? Occasionally you will lose some water along the way. And I guarantee the water on your water bill for that leak, that is not in your budget, right? And so the water leak you're already losing money. So if I spend a little money on a plumber to fix the leak, and it costs me less than the leak would have cost me in water, then I have actually saved money. right?
You have. And I don't think a lot of people look at DR that way. They don't look at it as I'm going to save money if I have an outage. They're looking at it as it's going to cost me money for something that I might not even ever use. But let's face it, in the age of what is going on in the current climate with cyber and ransomware, chances are you're going to use it. Ransomware is a disaster. It's not if, it's with when. On the Friday show, I kind of looked at my watch and I was like, oh, ransomware clock. Someone is getting hit someplace. I mean, it's constant.
Ransomware o'clock. I love
Ransomware
that.
clock.
I'm going to totally steal that and use that from you. Um, yeah, I mean, stuff breaks, right? You're going to have downtime. If you can mitigate that, you are saving money.
Yes.
And I think there's a reason why most organizations think about data protection the same way they think about insurance, right? There are not many drivers driving a car, especially a nice car, on the road who are not paying for car insurance, right? And it's the responsible thing to do because you would rather pay a little each month than buy a new car. I would rather back up a little each month than have to go buy a new IT infrastructure. All right, so let's flip gears though. So, because I mentioned a nice car, versus not a nice car. So there are different tiers of applications, right?
Yeah.
There's not one size fits all. There's not one insurance plan to hit them all. And this again is something that you've spent some time with, Melissa. To cue you up for this, I actually grabbed this slide. So Gartner actually did a rather interesting piece. Early 2020-ish, but it was a really nice piece on 16 tips to enhance your DR. It actually follows a lot of the DRII best practices that CDRPs have known for a very long time. But I thought the chart was a good one. So
no, it is a good chart.
Yeah. So walk us through this, because I thought this was a clean way to help organizations say one size does not fit all.
And that's true. One size does not fit all. So we have our mission critical applications, really, really low RPOs and RTOs. They need to be running. And we're going to protect that differently than we would a tier 4 bronze tier, right? Tape-based recovery. So the good thing there is there are software solutions out there. I wish I could think of one right now that allow you to protect all of your data the same way. So when I go to protect my data and recover it, if I'm using something like Veeam CDP, configuring it, working with it, recovering, looks and feels almost the exact same way as working with a Veeam replica or a Veeam backup. So why under the covers that we're using different levels of protection and technology from an operational standpoint, everything looks and feels very similar from a protection and recovery aspect. And there's all sorts of ways to meet this, right? For tier 0, Veeam CDP comes to mind. But when we're talking about tiers 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 even, we can get kind of flexible, right? We could do different type of backups. We can, depending on how often we're backing up, if we're going to use regular replication or storage-based replication, there's about 1,000 solutions for each application out there. It's about finding the right balance of performance for RPO and RTO, and of course cost, right? We do want to try to be somewhat cost conscious in this because we don't want to shock our app owners and our business owners with this huge bill at the end of the day. So cost is of course top of mind with these solutions as well.
So one thing I like about what you talked about was, there are several ways to do this. Now, you mentioned CDP, one of the most recent offerings available from Veeam. I'm gonna roll the clock back 31 years. Right, 31 years ago, when I first started doing data protection. Right, at the time, what we had was you would take all your applications and put them on this line. Huh?
Nothing. You had computers.
Wow. That's cold and not entirely inaccurate. But we would say, for those mission critical applications, we use things like SRDF, synchronous disk block storage, usually with NetWare SFT3. Look it up on Wikipedia, or it's in a history book near you. And so that was, zero failure rate. It was clustered on the workload. It was mirrored in the storage at a block level. That was great. And then you had this other extreme, nightly tape backup, right? And there was almost nothing in between, right? I mean, there was no asynchronous was not a thing. Software based was not a thing. And then over these years, what you saw was, okay, asynchronous storage started coming into it, then asynchronous replication, and now it's a gamut. And I love that it's almost that sliding lever of, what's your RPO, what's your
It's
RTO,
almost
put
like
it
a
on the
menu, right?
line.
Like pick from the menu. And do you want a side of something with that, or you want it plain, or?
Yeah, but here's the fun part. You can pick from a menu, but it's one menu from one store, right? It's one
Yes.
vendor that lets you do that.
It's like a diner.
Unlike when my kids were little, it was not uncommon for us to go through more than one drive-through in a single meal because everyone wanted to use, I want to use my disk mirroring from this vendor. I want to use my replication from this vendor. I want to use my backup over here, right? And that becomes really cost prohibitive as a parent. Can I get an amen?
Yeah, absolutely. Amen.
So instead, wouldn't it be great if you could actually cover that entire gamut from near zero RPO all the way up through nightly or even less than nightly backup as one set of capabilities? Speaking of gamuts, by the way, I'm looking at the clock. Let's hit the map one more time. Let's go back to the U.S. first. See in the U.S. Okay,
Wow.
hey, Louisiana's in the house, coming back from the floods. Glad to see you back online. Let's see over in Europe. We got France. Got some good friends in Belgium and Switzerland. Russia, love it when Russia comes online. It's kind of like Canada, makes a whole big chunk of the map turn green again. So that's awesome. Lebanon, Oman, is that Uganda? I think on there. Oman's actually new. The only reason I know that is because of one of my kids' maps not that long ago. Otherwise, I would not have been able to pick that up. So thank you, Oman, for joining us today. Let's look at the big map again. That's a lot of green,
It's a lot of
Melissa.
green. We're doing
A
pretty
lot of
good.
green. All right. So let's go back to that chart one last time. There's one other thing, and I think you actually taught me this when how important this was. We often start talking about the most important applications being mission critical along that way. But if you don't have DNS, if you don't have DHCP,
Yeah, you're gonna need that.
if you don't have plumbing, then none of that stuff turns on, right? None of it actually connects again.
And that's what a lot of people tend to forget, kind of those core infrastructure services that you need just to work, right? They're not directly impacting your business's reputation or how much money you're making in the next hour online, but guess what? You can't do anything without them. So those are really, really important to keep an eye on too.
Yeah, when I did my workshop and I was listing those applications, you list things like CRM and SQL and DNS and DHCP, and they were the things just lower in priority than mailroom, right? It's like, really, you don't think you're going to need IP addresses? That'll be fun. I would like to watch that session, please. I'll bring popcorn. So anyway, all right, we're almost at the end of time, Melissa. I'm going to ask you for one quick last pearl of wisdom, last nugget. But before we do, we want to advertise. Melissa and I did a Trailblazer talk, which is a thought leadership series not that long ago. The URL for that's on the bottom of the screen, VEE.am/BCDR21 talk. You're going to get a lot more information on some of the same stuff. This is on demand. You can watch it now. Melissa, give a plug for your Friday and then give us your closing wisdom on the way out.
Yeah, absolutely. So on Friday, you can tune back in and see myself and, the Friday standard Rick Vanover. We're going to talk about Veeam orchestration 4 different ways. Spoiler alert, I might have alluded about different ways to protect your data. So we're going to actually show you how to do it with Veeam.
All right.
And last kind of parting thoughts, really make sure that you have a good understanding of the business behind your applications, right? Because unless you understand the why you're protecting these things or why you've just deployed 25 VMs and now you have to back them all up, it's really difficult to kind of make sure that you're meeting those business requirements. And if we're not satisfying the business, we're really not doing our jobs as IT professionals at all.
Amen, amen. And the only thing I'll add to that is that if you're really going to do real BCDR planning, you're going to need a bigger conference room. No matter how big it is, you're going to need a bigger room. All right, with that, make sure to tune in on a Friday to see Melissa and Rick. Tune in next Monday. We'll do part 2 of this series.
I'll be back.
Melissa, thank you for coming back. And until then, thanks for watching. Take care.